I am going to introduce Zelda, and I wanted to thank everyone for joining today. When we do begin, I will spotlight Zelda. She'll take up your screen, and she does have a PowerPoint that she will be presenting. So first of all, thank you all. Welcome to we do this 3 times a week. It's a virtual gathering for Smile on Seniors. Today, we have the opportunity to listen to Zelda Schule, who is going to talk about her family's journey, which eventually brought her to the United States, but her family's journey really from World War II, fleeing the Nazis, and all the way up until today. Zelda was born in a DP camp, Camp Eichstatt, in 1947. She taught preschool at Temple Beth Tikvah in Fullerton, California. She retired 10 years ago from the City of Fullerton as an administrative assistant. And in her, I'm going to say free time, her volunteer work, she was the president of an ORT chapter. She's a member of the Yom Hashoah Commemoration Committee. And she's also part of a second gen group, which is many cities have a continuation of the generations of the Holocaust Survivors Association, where they then have children of Holocaust survivors who create what they call a second generation group, because there are things that they experience as children of Holocaust survivors that are quite unique, and they can support each other. So I'm going to share the spotlight with Zelda. Thank you so much, Zelda, for joining us today and presenting your story. And we're looking forward to learning about it. Thank you.
And first of all, I want to thank you, Rabbi, for your invitation. And I want to thank everybody that's joining me. Okay, so I need to open.
Share your screen. First, share your screen in Zoom.
Right.
Green button on the bottom.
Right. Share. And then.
Screen 1.
Share.
Perfect. Now we got it. Now on the bottom, you got to open your PowerPoint. Yeah, that's the one. It looks like it's the
right here.
No, it looks like the other one. Well, whichever you do.
That one I just downloaded before.
Okay, perfect.
And
now
then
click open it. Yep.
Open. Okay.
All right. And then start it from
slideshow.
Yep. And play from start.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Again, if you do have questions, please do keep them towards the end. You can write it in the chat, and if it's something you think you might forget, and we'll make sure Zelda gets them after her presentation.
Okay. Today is my honor to share my parents' and families' trials and tribulations during the Holocaust. They did not speak about their childhood or about that period. They shared with me the names of their parents and siblings, and also their experiences after escaping Poland several years after my father passed away. No, need to get back. Okay. And there's my father, Abram, and my mother, Sarah Goldscheft. He is the son of Moskir and Humamali. My grandfather rode a horse-drawn wagon. I do not know what he delivered. My father was born on June 20th, 1913 in Biala Podlaska. He was a carpenter. My father had two sisters, Hannah and Chaya, and three brothers, Lezer Yosef, Meir, and Hershko. And here is his cousin Lezer, Uncle Mordechai, another cousin Surah, and his aunt Bashia, and another cousin Hannah. And right here is his uncle Moshe and aunt Yudis. Two children were born before Hannah, Srul in 1901 and Chava in 1903, and she perished of typhus in 1906. My father and his siblings were not told about these children. This is where my grandparents lived with their son and daughter-in-law. On September 26th, 1939, the Soviet army entered the town, but withdrew a month later when the Soviet-German boundary agreement was reached. There were 7,439 Jews living there, 37% of the population. And this is where the Jewish quarters was, and where my grandparents and their son and daughter-in-law lived. Okay. A second deportation was carried out. A second deportation was carried out in which the entire remaining Jewish population was deported to the ghetto in Mierjichet on August 25th and 26th, 1942. This is a document that my grandfather is listed and my grandma, and it includes it lists, sex, family relationship, marital status, parents' names, dates of birth and location, previous address, religion, occupation, and children, and the date he was displaced to Mierjichet. It held 20,000 Jewish prisoners at its peak. Many were murdered in the forest on the way. The Nazis rounded up the Jews and killed them in 2 stages as part of the final solution. Around 8,000 to 11,000 Jews were forced onto trains destined to the Treblinka death camp. Most of the people were gassed there. A small group was sent to Majdanek extermination camp. Another 960 to 1,800 Jews were killed in mass shooting actions on the streets and in the Jewish cemetery. Some Jews were able to escape from the ghetto and were offered aid by local Polish inhabitants. Only 300 Jews were left in Białopodlaska in a newly established forced labor camp. It was liquidated in May 1944, and all the inmates were transferred to Majdanek concentration camp, where only a few remained. Several hundred Jews fled to the woods during the deportation. Only 30 survived when the region was liberated on July 26, 1944. My father moved to Warsaw on October 25th, 1934, with his first wife, Hannah Rosenblatt, who perished in 1942 with her family, except for one sister.
Zelda, click on, there you go. Click on that.
Yeah, it didn't work. Okay. My father fled from Poland in November 1939. His journey took him by train with his sister Hannah and Meir from Biala Podlaska to Kostyukovka for a brief time, and Gomel, Soviet Union, which is now Belarus. They met up with their cousin Nahum Mali, who was released from prison in Brest after 3 months. They both worked as carpenters in a huge glass factory. They were lucky. It was not difficult there. Hannah and Meir were sent to Kolkos and suffered very much. They worked hard and lacked food. In 1941, my father continued on to Siberia. He stayed there for a year and a half, and afterwards arrived in Mangashlak, Kazakhstan, where he met my mom in 1942. Shortly after, they left by train to Aktobe, Kazakhstan, and their marriage took place on November 20th, 1943. The distance that he covered was about 3,400 miles. My father was able to do some carpentry work, but rarely had enough money to feed the family. And this is my father's cousin Lazer and Nahum. Only Nahum survived. After the war, he with his wife Sonia were in our own DP camp in Germany, and later they moved to Israel. And this is my father's brother, Meir, with his children, Moshe, Hannah, and Bezalel. He stayed in Poland, and in 1956, he moved to Israel with his wife, Peshe, and children. And this is my father's cousin, Pearl, and her husband, Noah Rodinik. Since Pearl was blonde with blue eyes, she pretended she wasn't Jewish and was able to work so she could feed the family. Later on, she was forced on a train to Treblinka. When they stopped on the way, she managed to jump out. After hiding in different locations, she was very fortunate to be hidden by a Polish family on a farm. They are now referred to as righteous among the nations. Her husband and brothers also joined her. After the war, they went to Germany, and several years later moved to New York. Both Pearl and Noah participated in the Shoah Foundation interview. Noah shared the following when he was asked if he had dreams. At the beginning, I used to scream and yell. But today, I think to myself, did I survive? It is a survival. It is a story of living after surviving. It is a story of living after death. I was a dead person. I was not alive when I was hidden in the ground. I did not see the devil, the bandits, the gangsters, and rascals. I was in heaven when I did not see the Gestapo. And there's my father's cousin Bele and her friend Fivel. She fled to Russia with her brother, daughter, son, and husband, who died as a Russian soldier. She stayed in Poland until she moved to Israel in 1956 with her children and Fivel. And he's my father's cousin Sol. Noah Rotzinik. No, I'm sorry. I apologize. This is my father's cousin Morton and Noah Rotzinik and Sol Eisenberg. Sol was 14 years old when the Nazis entered his town of Janov Podlaska. He was transferred to Malevishevitz. There was a small camp on an airstrip. His responsibility was to go out and bring in buckets of water. He escaped and dug a hole covered with wheat, and then he hid in the forest and wheat fields. He eventually ended up with his sister, her husband, and brother, the home of a Polish family that hid him. Now I would like to share my mother's story. My mother, Sarah Golchev, Sura Mikhnovska, was born on December 10th, 1921 in Kolno, Poland. And this is my grandfather, Ruben Mikhnovsky, and grandma, Zelda Mikhnovsky, which I'm named after, with her sister, with my mom's sister, Hannah, and brother, Lazer. My grandfather was a tailor that worked at home for the military, and he had 3 people working for him. My mom's siblings are Sulam and Beryl, were twins that died within their first year. Beryl, Isaac, Hannah, and Lazer, who was a high school teacher. He left to the United States in 1937, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to locate him or family members. Nearly 3,600 Jews lived in Kolno, comprising over 70% of the total population. There were 2 synagogues. The Poles organized pogroms against the Jews in 1939. On September 29, 1939, the Soviets entered Kolno and remained there until June 22nd, 1941. When the Germans bombed and occupied the city. My mother fled to the Soviet Union within a week. She was unable to persuade her family to join her. Some Jews fled to Lomzha, which was about 20 miles south, wanting to believe that they would be safer in the big city. To their sorrow, about 2,000 people were transported to Auschwitz. Poles murdered 37 Jews, raped women, and raided property in the beginning of July. The German killing squads rounded up the male on Shabbat, July 11th, and on the following Shabbat, the women and children and transported them to two different towns near Kolno. A total of 2,000 people were killed, the majority of them in mass graves. 80 worked for Germans and their families, and about 90 of the original 2,000 plus survivors were transported to Auschwitz and Theresienstadt concentration camps. Only one woman survived by the end of the war. My mom sold her gold watch so she can have enough money for food, housing, and travel. From Kolno, she went by train to Minsk, Soviet Union, which is now Belarus, and Kharkiv, which is now Ukraine, and then to Rostov. My mom continued on to flee to Manguslak. Let me get back a little bit. I apologize. Okay, I'm sorry. By the time she got to Makalakov, she did not have any more money and lived in the street. Afterwards, she managed to earn a little money and went to Manguslak, Kazakhstan, right here, by boat and train, where she lived in a small room. My mom worked in a hospital by boat and train where my mom worked in a hospital for a year for very little money and food. She met my father in 1942, and then they traveled to Aktobe. The distance she covered was about 3,790 miles. She worked in an airport parts factory where she received food stamps for bread. The cafeteria served soup and pickles. My mom gave birth to my brother Shlomo in March 1945. She told me that she used to give my father half of her bread during her pregnancy. She switched to an evening job at a hospital so she could take care of my brother during the day, and she had to walk far in the snow. In the beginning of 1946, my parents and brother returned to Bialopodlaska to tragically discover that my father's parents, two brothers, a sister, cousins, and extended family perished. Only his sister Hannah, his brother Meir, and cousins Bele Preter, Nuchemali, Pearl Vatzinik, Motel Vatzinik, and Sol Eisenberg perished. And here's my father. And the plaque states, from the Jews, from the Jewish Kedusha, the people who were murdered by anti-Semites. I don't know what it says there. The pictures are covered. Something Hitler murdered. Monsters, I think it was. Hitler's murdered at Biała Podlaska, April 25th, 1946. And there's my father and his cousin, Nahum. This is a memory remembrance for the souls that survived all years the barbarism that occurred in Biała Podlaska. It was erected in 1946 and destroyed later. And as you could see, there are only two headstones left, and this is a new one that was added 2 years ago. And this is one of the sides of the fences. My mom found out that her entire family perished. She mentioned to me once that she wished she would not have left home. My response to her was, then you wouldn't have been my Ima, which is mother in Hebrew. She lived with survivor's guilt. This building was a synagogue. And there's a plaque right on the side there. And the wording on the plaque is, this building was constructed in the 19th century and housed a synagogue. Since its establishment in the 17th century, the Jewish community of Kolno contributed greatly to local cultural and economic development. In 1939, nearly 3,600 Jews lived here, contributing over 70% of the total population. World War II ended their existence. May the memory of those who prayed here and were murdered in 1941 during the Holocaust be blessed. In the summer of 1946, they were forced to leave Poland because of anti-Semitic manifestations among the Polish population. My parents and brother continued on to Vienna, Austria, where they stayed for a few months, Niederschnetzel, Germany, for a brief time, and finally they arrived in Eichstatt, Germany, displaced persons camp, near Munich on December 23rd, 1946. Many survivors did not want to return to their countries of origin and demanded that they be allowed to immigrate to Palestine. In 1945, the Jewish world responded, and organizations such as the American Joint Jewish Distribution Committee, the Mossad, the Haganah, the Jewish Agency for Palestine, and the Jewish military personnel from the US and England all played major roles in massive efforts. Displaced person camp in Germany, Austria, and Italy for refugees from Eastern Europe came into existence in 1945 by the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration as a result of the liberation from concentration camps and forced labor units. There were 80 camps. Nearly all of the DP people were malnourished, a great number were ill, some were dying, and most of the refugees suffered from psychological difficulties. From 1945 to 1952, more than 250,000 Jewish DPs lived there in urban centers. About 136,000 people left for Israel, over 80,000 to the US, and another 20,000 to other countries. The American military advisors managed Eichstatt. I was born in August 1947. We lived in wooden barracks. My father's sister Hannah and husband Sol Schnur were also with us. And my cousin Morris was born in 1949. And here's a panorama view of the camp. And there's a copy of my birth certificate. I was born in a hospital operated by the International Refugee Organization, and my given name was Zelda. And here are my parents with me and my brother Shlomo and my Aunt Hannah and Uncle Sol. And here I am with my brother Shlomo and here with my beautiful coat. And here's my aunt again, Hannah and Morris, their son, and Sol. And they were Auschwitz survivors. Here's my Uncle Sol and my father. They were trained as police officers in Regensburg, which is 60 miles away, and joined the Polish police department. It gave them something to do, and it was definitely important for their self-respect and confidence. This was a very important factor for the Jews in seeing themselves not only as a people, but also as a nation. The infrastructure in the camps, the educational system, and the language was focused on a possible common state in the future. Some people were also trained in the agricultural professions. The Zionist dream of a common Jewish nation, Eretz Israel, seemed possible. And there's a certificate from there for my father, and it mentioned that he was a cabinet maker. In October 1948, my parents, brother, and I left Germany to Marseille, France, and on November 29, boarded a ship to Israel. We first arrived at a Tlit detaining camp where we lived in wooden barracks. After several days, we moved to Pardes Chana for a short stay and later relocated to Lut. Since many Arabs left the city, my parents were told to choose a house and register with City Hall. It was very old, without a bathtub, so the kids bathed in a big tub in the kitchen. There was an ice box. The toilet which was in a small building outdoors, had a hole in the ground. And we had a large yard with fruits and vegetables. There were no paved streets. My youngest brother, Reuben, was born in August 1950. After a few years, we moved to an apartment. My brothers and I shared a room, and my parents slept in the living room, which was also a dining room. At first, my father, my Abba, did some odd jobs and later worked at the airport as a carpenter. During the Sinai War, which started on October 29, 1956, he was stationed at the Jordanian border as a reservist because the Palestinian Arabs opened fire on the residents nearby. My mom, brother, and I hid in the bunker several times. I remember that I was so excited when my father returned once for the day and brought us chocolates, which we hardly ate. I asked him to go back and bring some more. My father immigrated to Paterson, New Jersey on June 17, 1958, having been sponsored by his sister, Hannah. He arrived with $10 in his pocket without speaking English. He needed to find a job in an apartment before we can join him. My father worked in a bedroom manufacturing factory. I arrived at the port in New York on the Zim line with my mom and brothers on November 17, 1958. My mom worked at a coat factory full-time. It was very difficult to adjust to a new, strange country and not knowing the language. We lived in 2 different apartments and we finally moved into a house. My parents worked very hard to build a new life, and we were naturalized in 1965. There's my father's certificate. And my mom's. My mom was truly a Yiddish mama. She was a caring person and a wonderful cook. The grandchildren were her pride and joy. When my son Steve was over a year old, she placed him in the kitchen sink with water running to distract him and fed him her delicious chicken soup. And I told him that story when he grew up, and he shared it in his bar mitzvah speech. My father was an excellent carpenter. He built this cabinet for my son, which is now in my home. And there's my brother Shlomo and my youngest brother Reuben. Reuben returned to Israel in 1971 and lived in Kibbutz Magan Michael. When the Yom Kippur War started, he was assigned to 188 Armored Barak Brigade. They were first in line in defense in the first days of the war in southern Golan. They suffered serious losses in the war. He met his wife, Linda, in the kibbutz, who arrived from Zimbabwe and were married in her hometown. Shortly after, they came to live near us. Sadly, my brother passed away in 1995 at a young age of 44. Excuse me. Leaving behind 2 young sons. Shlomo moved back to Israel in 1972. And this is my oldest son, Steve, and my granddaughter, Claire, and grandson, Noah. And there's my grandson, Cameron, Claire, Noah, and Gavin. Since I grew up without grandchildren, it was important for me to move here 9 years ago from Orange County to bond with my 4 wonderful grandchildren and celebrate the Jewish holidays with everyone in my home. And there's my youngest son, Alan, and his wife, Jenna, and Cameron, and Gavin. After retirement, my parents moved to Fullerton, California in 1975 to live near their grandchildren, son-in-law, and me. My father worked at Temple Beth Tikvah as a custodian and volunteered at the senior center. He passed away on February 11, 1997. My mom worked at the Fullerton Senior Center kitchen and volunteered in Temple Beth Tikvah, and she passed away on April 11, 2005. In conclusion, as a mother and grandmother, I feel it is utmost importance to pass on our Jewish heritage to our children and grandchildren, just like the strong chain where the next link depends on the previous. And we never want that strong ancestral succession to break. And this is why I spent many hours researching my family tree. Even though my parents gave me some information, there were gaps. I have learned so much, and now my family will be able to continue to forward our rich past to their children and grandchildren. Okay.
Zelda, thank you very much. Are you ready for some questions?
Yes,
Okay. Did you have any more slides, or that was the last slide?
that's it. Okay, so
You have one question in the chat, but I see already someone has unmuted themselves.
okay, where do I
Now, if you close your PowerPoint, you can hit the, on the bottom, there was the 3 buttons, and you can do exit slideshow, end slideshow.
yeah, I know I saw it last time, but where is it now? Is it to the right or left?
To the left. It's between the arrows.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, it's being covered. Let's see, is that it? No.
What do you see on your screen?
It's covered by my different apps.
Oh, so if you see your other apps, just go to Zoom.
Go to where?
The one that says Zoom.
One that goes to Zoom. Oh, okay.
You see us?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right. If you want to change your view to see everyone just on the top right, you could do gallery view.
Okay, there I am.
All right. So one question that came in the chat. I know you had shared the picture of your father, and I think it was your uncle that were wearing the police uniforms in Poland. So was that a specific police force for the town, or was that for the DP camp specifically?
You know, it's interesting. I had that picture in my parents' album, but I don't remember even asking him what it was. And So I actually, I was very, very fortunate. About 6 months ago, I was very curious about the DP camps. And I didn't even have an original birth certificate, because when we came to United States, the only thing I have is something that was certified by a witness. And I got online and I Googled Eichstatt DP Camp, and I found an archive company, and they referred me to the nicest man. His name is Maximilian, that lives in Eichstatt. And he was always curious about the DP camps. And when he retired, he did research. He actually, about a year and a half ago, had a reunion for, he referred to it as babies from Eichstatt, but he wouldn't have located me since I got married. And so he shared with me so much information. He also found my birth certificate, and it translated, and also my cousin's. And I sent him that picture because it on the door on top, it says Polania, Poland, which didn't make sense. So then he sent me information about that picture. And supposedly there were different police forces representing each country. So that's why, and he sent me information which mentioned that they felt really good being with to represent their country.
Thank you. I know that Laurie, you had unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Go for
How
it.
many years did you work for Temple Beth Tikvah? And did you know Chaim? Were you there when Chaim was the rabbi?
Who was asking me?
Laurie.
Chimmerman.
Oh, of course. Of course. He was, so you knew him.
Well, we were members. My children, my girls were bat mitzvah there.
Really? Wow. So my father started, well, I started teaching there in 81 till 89 before I went.
My kids are older. Okay.
Yes. And he was the most wonderful person. I was just crushed when he passed away, and I'm still in touch with Elaine. So whenever I go down to Orange County, which unfortunately I couldn't do this year, I also meet up with her.
Do you know the Goldbergs?
Goldberg.
Janice and Mitchell Goldberg.
And Mitchell, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Miriam Kaufman.
Laurie, I'm
Yes.
going to steer the questions back to the presentation, but stay on. Zelda.
I'm sorry. I was so excited to
You're
see
doing Jewish.
a California move to Arizona like me. I wasn't the only crazy one.
So Zelda, I think your friend Laurie has a question. I see she unmuted her mic. I'm not sure. Did you? No? Okay. Any other questions specific to the presentation before we let Laurie do the Jewish geography with Zelda?
Where do you live now, Zelda?
What?
Where are you living now? I thought you were in Orange County.
No. I am living right south of Sacramento. I moved 10 years ago because both my sons are here and grandchildren.
Okay.
But I miss everybody. I have, of course, my Linda and friends that I know for over 40 years. And of course, the weather. The weather and the beaches. Just give me those beaches. I miss the beaches. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Ethel, did you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I'd like to thank you for sharing your story, your family story. It was quite amazing. And your father was an amazing guy, how he traveled from one place to the other, how he survived. It's unbelievable.
Well, both my parents, yes, both my parents.
Yes.
Right.
And I guess it's a good lesson. You have to go with the flow and be adventuresome.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
everybody can do that.
so many Jews didn't believe that that's what's going to happen to them.
Right.
That's why they didn't want to leave.
He was
Right.
very forward
And
thinking.
my mother lived with that all the years. She lived with that all the years. She didn't talk much about it, but I could tell, you know, how she behaved, how she acted sometimes. And to tell you the truth, I really didn't realize that much, how much she struggled until I joined my second gen group. And then that's when we all sat. We started it about 5-6 years ago, sharing our stories about our parents. And then I realized from some people, yeah, oh my gosh, that's how my mom acted. Yeah.
That's what they say is the big thing. That's why there's so many second generation groups.
Exactly.
Well, my father he was in America. My grandparents didn't want to leave Białystok, Poland. Of course, they died in Auschwitz. And my father never really discussed anything. It was very difficult. There was a guilt that his parents died and he didn't.
Exactly.
And his whole family, except for a brother who also lived in the forest and wound up in Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Kolno is north of Białystok.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Welcome.
Have you ever gone back to Poland?
I never did. I just haven't had an opportunity to go. I won't go by myself, and maybe one day I'll go back. I won't go to Germany. No way. But to Poland, I would have loved to go, especially now that I did all the research. So we'll see, maybe the time when things clear up and if I can find somebody to go with me, I will go.
Thank you. Any other questions about the story or about her family? I know that being born in a DP camp puts you in a special club. It's not a lot of people can say that about themselves. But I know we introduced you to someone locally who wanted to meet you as well. Similar story, being born in a DP camp.
Pardon me?
I said there's someone that we had introduced you locally in Phoenix that was also born in a DP camp.
And who was this?
That was David Piafka.
Oh, okay.
But there are others. I know it's very unique, and obviously it just shows the resolve of the Jewish people that, you know, you put your life back together immediately and didn't let it bog you down.
No, I mean, I'm really amazed of how much my parents accomplished, because it was very difficult in Israel. Life was not easy. The war was still going on. We came right after independence and worked very hard. We hardly had anything. I didn't even realize how poor we were. And then, you know, pack everything up and come to a strange country. I didn't know a word of English, nothing. I used to come home from school and cry my eyes out. And my oldest brother, that was 13, he wanted to go back right away. And my parents said, no, you're staying here. You need to get your education. Eventually, he did go back. And my youngest brother, may he rest in peace, he was only 8. And then he went back in 71.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, I try to go back as often as I can, because that's my roots, really.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's inspirational, like you said.
Again, thank you.
Thank
for
you.
inviting me, to all of you. And yeah, Max, are you still on?